called the PUC, which increased the maximum benefit duration by 13 weeks. And this program also is set to expire by the end of the year. And there's a third program called the FPUC, Federal Pandemic Employment, I think, Compensation, something. So this program increased the benefit level in short term and increased the weekly benefit level by $600. This is intensively discussed in the news and also among policymakers, because as I will show, it may generate some, the concern is that it may generate a large disincentive effect. And this program actually now expired, okay, expired in late July, but it played a very important role back to March to July, that period. And currently still debated whether the Congress should extend a little bit or part of that benefit top up, right? So overall, there are three programs, three types of changes. They're unusual. Why is that? Because if you remember in the great financial crisis, the US economy also extended the UI benefit, but that's mainly through extending the maximum benefit duration. So if you remember in around 2010, the maximum benefit duration was extended several times at the end to a maximum of 99 weeks. However, this time, the reform or the policy change is really a multi-dimensional policy change, which includes three dimensions. You increase the benefit eligibility, means you include more people to collect unemployment benefits. And also you extend the benefit duration, the standard one. And more importantly, also raise the benefit level. And this benefit level is for every qualified person. And this 600 per week is substantial. Later on, I will show some micro evidence to show you that means for most of the people, the benefit level is already more than their working wages, right? So given these big changes, now there are some concerns how large this may contribute to the increase in the US unemployment rate. And so without a model, it's hard to answer this question. That's why we want to set up the model. However, besides this multi-dimensional reform, there are two other features which is new during in this current environment, which could complicate the analysis. One is as we know, this is a pandemic time. What that means? That means there's some infection risk in the economy, right? So that itself could change people's incentive or the job search decisions, right? When you see there are more infection risk at the workplaces, you may have less incentive to go out to look for jobs. Second, back to middle March to April, and also extend to May, different states had implemented very large so-called mitigation policy, like those stay-at-home orders and the closure of non-essential business. So all these changes, they're trying to protect the people, right? Protect the people from being infected. But at the same time, they destroy the jobs, right? So at that time, labor market conditions were very bad. So this itself, of course, had some big impact on workers' decision in searching for jobs, and also on firms' decision in whether to post some new job vacancies. So these two new factors complicated the whole analysis in evaluate the UI policy effect. So that's why we need a model to incorporate these two new features, and then be very careful on the UI policy change to overall evaluate the impact. And specifically, we want to, the key is try to evaluate how the UI policy interact with the mitigation policy, I call the shutdown policy, and health dynamics. Okay, so that's a very long motivation. And what we do is on the methodology, we incorporate two frameworks to study this question. One is a search and matching model. So this is now it's a very standard model to generate unemployment rate. It has two parts: workers' part, the firm's part. They joint determine how many jobs created and how many jobs are continuing every period. So that's a very standard framework to generate unemployment rate. Now the other one is new because currently the new feature is a pandemic. There's a infection risk. So we incorporate the current, this very popular epidemiological so-called SEER model. So I will explain what's S, what's I, what's R means. But in general, you can think that's a model which is used to study the number of the infected people in the economy over time. So that's what a SEER model does. So we basically combine these two frameworks. And then we carefully model the UI policies consistent with the pattern in the microdata that I will show. And the key mechanism in the model is as follows. The UI policy plays two roles. First, it's the standard, or the conventional view is higher UI policy, lower worker search. So that's one effect. The other effect, which is new to the literature, is in the current pandemic time, it also reduces workplace infection. Right? So if the policy let or allow workers to stay at home longer and reduce that time at the workplace, that reduces the risk of being infected. So there are two effects. And we're gonna use a model to kind of separate these different channels or the mechanisms and try to hyper understand, which part plays an important role and different component. We will see that. So main finding, as a preview of our main finding, the recent UI policy changes under the CARES Act raised the US unemployment rate by an average of 3.8 percentage points over April to December this period, but also lower infection and reduce cumulative deaths by 4.9%. Sorry, there's a percent, 4.9%. So the general conclusion is this UI policy change has two impacts. One is, yes, it contributed to some of the increase in the US unemployment rate, but at the same time, it reduced the deaths, the bad consequence of the pandemic, okay? And as I said, one new feature is of these policy changes, it involves three dimensions. So using our calibration model, we can decompose which program contributes more. And our finding is those eligibility expansion and extra $600 benefit top up contribute more than 90% of the total effect. Well, those 13-week benefit duration extension plays a relatively small role. And finally, regarding the welfare, we always want to say whether policy is good or bad. So we conduct a very standard welfare analysis, and our results suggest the UI policies overall improve the welfare of workers, but reduce the welfare for non-workers, both young and old. That's because non-workers, they do not receive the benefit, but they need to pay the tax to cover that. I will be more specific on that. But another feature of this welfare analysis is crucially depends on the health parameters. I will also talk about that at the end. So that's basically our motivation and our main findings. And in terms of the contribution, this paper, I will be very brief here. So we made several contributions. One is, the novelty of our work is we have the interaction between UI policy and the infection risk. There are many papers in the past studying the UI effect in the business cycle, but none of that involves the infection risk. And this is also unique to the current pandemic time. And also we set up a unified framework to study UI policy in the environment with both the health shock and also employment shock. The employment shock is represented by this state level mitigation policy, those stay-at-home order, closure of non-essential businesses. Those you can consider those as a very negative employment shock. So we have a unified framework to incorporate these two types of a shock and then evaluate the UI policy effect. And finally, to the best of our knowledge, we are the first to utilize a quantitative framework to decompose the 3 dimensions of the UI policy effect during this pandemic time. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm going to first go to the model, and then I will talk about how we calibrate the model. And then I will show you the quantitative results. I will show you a lot of figures, which should be easy to see, the policy effect, the UI policy effect. All right, so the model, I need to tell you, the key players in the model, because here we have the health shocks, which means that different type of the peoples by health status. We also distinguish the young people between young people and the older people, because young people and the older people, they have a different infection risk, right? And another important thing is for the young workers, okay, those people who work, we distinguish between, we have 2 sectors. We call the contact sector and the non-contact sector. So the difference is, by definition, contact sector, they involve more face-to-face work. They need to go to workplace to work. While those non-contact sector, they are more likely, or they are more able to work from home. We're going to use some empirical measure to divide the industries, group the industries into 2 groups. One is contact sector, the other is non-contact sector. I will talk more about the difference in the model. Now the health, this part, as I said, we basically follow a slightly extend the current very popular epidemiological SEER model. We have 5 states. 4 possible active states are S, means susceptible. You can consider those as healthy people. M means mild infected people. So those you can think of those people as maybe infected but asymptomatic, does not have any symptoms, but they can also potentially they can also infect other people. And we have this infected severe. So this type of people, you can consider those people as hospitalized people. They are severely infected. They cannot work, and that's a type of which, if it's not lucky, it may lead to death. And we know that the older people have a higher probability of dying. Okay, so and also that's recovered. When you recover, you can continue to work. So in general, we have this SMIRD 5 health status. Now, in terms of the implications for the labor market, 3 types, SMR, these people, they can work. But the severely infected people, they cannot work, because you can think, as I said, they may be in hospital, they cannot work. And we have 2 sectors. Working in the contact sector has the extra infection risk, as I mentioned. And on the labor market, so here we try to keep the model as simple as possible. So unemployed worker search, because that's a key of our model. How the UI policy influence the worker supply, labor supply through the search decision. We assume there's no endogenous separation, which means we do not allow worker to quit. Okay, that's only an exogenous separation rate, but we do not consider model the endogenous choice. And the firm post vacancies, so that's a standard feature of a searching and matching model. Right, so next turn to the preference. The preference is very simple. There are two parts. One is on the income, the other is on the health. Now on the health, I want to point you to here. This U hat. This is a health, but largely they are health disutility or utility loss. So this is less than 0 for infected people, and of course for the loss of life. Now the other important thing is this discount rate beta. In our simulation, we will calculate the welfare, which involves the transitional path and the steady state based on the life expectancy. And we know that because the life expectancy is different, so we assume the discount rate of older people to be smaller than the discount rate of young people. So that's about the preference. And then on the production and the technology. So that's on the labor market side. The production or the technology is important. Why? Because we have two sectors. One is the contact sector, the other is in-contact sector. Okay, these two sectors in the data, they could look very differently, like their wage distribution or other things. So the way we model that is we assume each sector has a different aggregate productivity, Z, okay? In particular, in the data, we can see the wage or the productivity is higher in the non-contact sector. But the other thing is, important thing is we need to model workers' search decision. And we know the search decision is different across different people. So we have an idiosyncratic or individual efficiency level, A. So this is like your ability, your education, or experience, anything. So this together is output, and also largely they also determine the wage the worker receive. Okay, so the difference here, if we jump to the end, the two sectors differ in their infection rates and also their labor market in terms of the productivity, wage, job separation rate, and the matching efficiency. Okay. Now in the middle part, the other thing I want to highlight is this is search. So in our model, search is costly. Means that the worker need to decide how intensively they want to search. Of course, more effort means a higher probability of meeting a firm, but also it's more costly. The whole purpose here is we're trying to model the supply, labor supply, the job search decision in response to the UI policy change. Now this part is for people who work in the search and matching literature. This is important in a sense. This is a core idea of the search matching model. You have a matching function, which determines the probability of a worker searching for a job to meet a job vacancy or firm. And this probability is jointly determined by two things. One is available job vacancies. The other is how many people are searching in the labor market, right? So you can think if there are more job opportunities than the number of people who are searching for jobs, that means for each person searching for jobs, it's more likely to find a job. In the other case, if suppose there are very few job vacancies or available jobs around, and more workers searching for the job, that means it's more difficult to find a job. And these two situations will have very different implications for the job search behavior as well. So this is also one point I will highlight in the end, that when we evaluate the UI policy, the UI benefit policy, we also need to take into account the labor market conditions, right? Suppose the labor market conditions are strong, the UI policy may have larger impact. But when the labor market conditions is bad, the UI policy may have smaller impact. What does it mean is, think about the extreme case. Back to March, suppose everyone is under the so-called stay-at-home order. Most states impose this closure of non-essential business. There are basically no job opportunities outside. Then even you want to find a job, regardless of the benefit, you cannot find. And in that case, providing some financial support to people is important, but actually we are not changing their job decisions. So that's actually one thing we want to highlight when we show the results. All right. Okay, so I'll be go fast a little bit. So the cost. So here I already talked about the cost. Here I just want to highlight that actually two types of cost. One is the cost to each individual, like a loss in income if you cannot work, and also utility cost, being sick. But there are also like a social cost, because the infection or the illness that will reduce the labor supply. Second, it also could increase infection risk for other people. So this is social cost. Now for government, there are two types of policies, which are the policy we want to start. We'll study. So one is a UI policy. So here, the UI policy is captured by three parameters. One is benefit level. This is additional benefit level. And the other is this optional. This optional means, what's the probability? In the model, it's the probability of the UI benefit expiration. So that's to capture the duration. A smaller expiration probability means a longer duration, right? So in our case, suppose there's a 13-week extension. That means the option goes down. Now, we also have one program which increase or expand the eligibility. So in the model, we have a lambda, which shows the probability of newly unemployed workers of receiving benefits. So expansion in our model means an increase in lambda. And then finally, we have this mitigation policy or the shutdown policy, MT. The way we model that is we assume M will influence the separation rate, delta separation rate. Basically, the idea is that suppose the mitigation policy or the shutdown policy is very tight, that will lead to more job separations, causing more people to be unemployed. That's basically the ideas. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna skip the next two slides because here it shows the work and the firm decisions. The only thing I want to highlight is in our model, a worker is indexed by the sector it works and also efficiency level, health status, and also employment benefit status. Okay, and also we need to keep track of the health transitions. And this is very standard for the firm decision. The key decision is a vacancy posting, whether to post a vacancy. It is jointly determined by the cost and the expected return. All right, so that's a structure model. Then let's look at the parameter, because we want to model not only the steady state but also the transition, right? Like from March, April to now, that's a transition period because there's some aggregate shock, there's some policy changes. So we're gonna calibrate both the steady state and the transitional path, and also we need to calibrate the health parameters. Now, this is the table on the two sectors I mentioned, how we group different industries into two sectors. Contact sector and a non-contact sector. What we do is as follows. We follow literature, a paper. This paper, Dingle and Lyman, they have a tele-workable index. This index is here. What this means is a higher index means this industry in this industry, workers are more able to work from home. When here is low, that means it's less likely to work from home. You need to go to workplaces. Therefore, we group this industry as a contact sector. And this industry with a relatively high teleworkable index as non-contact sectors. And here, as you can see, just to confirm our intuition, as you can see, this column shows employment change. Basically, negative means employment decline. During the February to April, the period, as you can see, the contact sector experienced a larger employment decline than the non-contact sector, right? So what that means is the mitigation policy, the shutdown policy, has a larger impact on the contact sector than the non-contact sector. Of course, it's also influenced by the labor market decision, like the workers' decision, whether to go to find a job or not. But I think that's consistent with our decision to group the industries into two groups, because these two groups are different in the sense. One group, they are less impacted by the health shock and employment shock. The other group, the contact sector, they are more sensitive to the mitigation, the shutdown policy, and also the health shock, because workers need to go to workplace to work. Now, and then we calibrate the steady state using various of data. We use this household CPS data, household level, the current population survey, this data, to measure the share of young people, the share of the young people in the labor force, and also the share of the labor force for each sector, right? And then this part I already mentioned, we calibrated to the actual UI policy. And here we use a labor market, basically a lot of data from the BEA or the BIS to calibrate the labor market variables. This is very standard. Now this one, F, is a distribution of the efficiency, which determines the worker's wage and the output. That's based on the CPS as well. So basically we look at all these industries, group into two, and then we construct a wage distribution, and then we construct this efficiency. Now, there are some parameters we cannot individually pin down separately, and then therefore we jointly calibrate by matching a group of moments. As you can see, our model does a very good job in matching these key moments in pin down these parameters. And finally, on the health parameters, this is a new feature that is a key, but basically the general idea is we basically choose these parameters, try to match the observed dynamics of different health states.
Hey, June, we lost you. So there's a connection issue. Hey, June, we lost your voice.
Okay. Looks like he's dropped out and he'll join us again.
Let me text him. Let me see. Eh? 我们听不到你了。So we lost you. So Jun, so he has some connection with his VPN. It seems like so the bank have some security on their computer. So he's connecting now.
All right, sorry about that. There was some connection issue with my VPN. So I'm gonna reshare my slides and continue. Okay. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I apologize again. There was a disconnection. So I'm gonna continue from these slides, maybe previous slides. So here, I want to talk just a little bit more about the UI policy. Remember, these are the key parameters we want to, we will change the policy parameter. This is like a $600 top up. And also there's this parameter, just expiration rate, and also the eligibility probability. Okay, now the reason I want to show you this slide is this table. Now, if you look at this table, look at the bottom panel, the data versus model. So some micro data based on other paper, other study, it shows. Look at this one. It shows before the policy change or the pre-CARES Act, the average replacement ratio is only 0.45. What that means? That means the average benefit level received is about 45% of workers' average income, right? So that makes sense because that means, financial UI benefits provide some financial support, right, to reduce the income loss. However, after or post the CARES Act, this ratio goes up to surprisingly 1.66. That means on average, it's more than the working wages for what people earn at the jobs, right? If you look at it here, these are more details. This is a median. This is the conditional on the replacement ratio above 1. And this is conditional replacement ratio, sorry, not a conditional, it's a share. 69% of people, that's what I said, 70% of people, they have benefit more than their working ages. There are 21% more than actually double their wage income. Of course, that, kind of support people's concern. It may generate a disincentive effect, right? So actually one comment that I would try to add in the end, but I want to say here is this policy change is very simple, right? Because the shock arrives so unexpected, so severely, the Congress immediately approved some policy change, and this benefits increases for everyone. And then you can imagine if it's possible, if the benefits could tie to each person's income, that will mitigate this disincentive impact, right? It's not like everyone receives the same benefits. I mean, from the perspective of reducing the disincentive effect of UI policies, so not using average, the uniform increase, rather tie the benefit increase to their maybe personal earning might be a better choice. Okay, now one more thing before we see the results. This is how we calibrate the shutdown policy parameter M. M, again, is you can consider M, a higher M means more job separation, more unemployed, right? So it basically chooses the path of M to target the aggregate unemployment rate path. And these are the policy changes, right? So you have a $600 top up and expired now. You have an increase in benefit, maximum benefit duration. You have an increase in number. Okay, so given all these, now we have the model, we have the parameters, we have the policy changes. Then we're gonna show a few things. What I will show, so in the rest of 10 to 15 minutes, or 10 minutes, I'm gonna show you very quickly, 5 set of results. One is what's overall effect on health dynamics? And second, what's the overall effect on the unemployment rate or the unemployment dynamics? Now, third one, I want to emphasize amplification effect, because there are a lot of interaction between the UI policy and other policy, and employment shock and the shutdown policy. I want to show you with and without these changes, what's the UI policy effect, right? So that's a nice thing of using a structure model. We can always do counterfactual. Now, we also, as I said, the new contribution of our paper is we can also decompose the different components, the 3 components of UI policy change. And finally, we'll briefly show the welfare comparison. So, okay, this is this slide shows the impact of 2 policies on health dynamics. It's actually, you can think of the 5 charts. There are 5. These refer to 5 types of health, S, M, I, R, D, right? There are 3 lines. The solid line is no policy, means there's only the no economic policy, which means that only health infection, the health dynamics is there. The infection risk is there, but there are no shutdown policy, no UI policy. Now the blue dashed line shows the dynamics when there's only mitigation shutdown policy, but no UI policy. Now the red dashed line basically include both shutdown policy and UI policy. Now overall, what we can see is that these 2 policies basically have flattened the curve, meaning that they shift the peak to the right and also they lower the peak, right? So which means that they are effective in reducing or to control the health, the infection spread. Now, second, on the unemployment rate, again, here there are 3 lines, shows no policy, shutdown policy, and a shutdown plus UI. And the top panel is on the overall unemployment rate, the aggregate unemployment rate. The bottom left is on the contact sector. The bottom right is on the non-contact sector. So visually, we can see 2 things. One is the shutdown policy actually contributed the majority of the increase, right? Of course, UI policy also contributes significantly, but the majority of the increase is caused by the shutdown, not by the UI benefit, okay? So this basically first answer the question, people trying to say, well, how large is the UI policy in contributing to the increase in the unemployment rate? Our answer is yes, it's significant, but it's not the largest. The majority is caused by the shutdown. Okay, and of course, these two sectors, you see huge difference. The main impact is on the contact sector due to both the shutdown policy and the UI policy. Okay. Now, let's focus on the UI policy and then focus on the amplification or the interaction. So here's a very interesting comparison, which will show the difference, show the different impact of UI with and without other shocks. The first one is effect of the current UI changes, assuming there's no infection and also no shutdown policy. That would increase the unemployment rate by 2%. So you can consider that as a number which we can compare with past literature, right? So that's without the disruption from the health dynamics and also this unprecedented shutdown policy. So 2%, 2 percentage points. And with infection, which means suppose that's taking into account the health, the infection risk, the reduction in unemployment, the increase in the unemployment rate is 2.4. Okay, that means the health itself, health dynamics, because it caused some people to unable to work, that would increase our unemployment rate by 0.4 percentage point, right? But if we further include the shutdown policy, then the overall UI effect would be an increase of 3.8% in unemployment rate. So from 2% to 3.8%, that increase in the impact of UI, that refers to the amplification that we are trying to emphasize. So in other words, when we talk about the UI policy, you see, we need to remember the UI policy also interact with other things. You can simply say, well, all the effect is caused by UI. It's caused by UI, that's right, but also amplified by other things. Similarly, we see the same pattern in terms of the health on the health dynamics, death reduction. Okay, I will be very quick on these two slides. These two slides want to make 2 points to try to show the mechanism behind. So what happened, why the labor market, the unemployment rate changes is due to, in the search and matching model, it can be explained by firm's decision and a worker decision. So here it shows that in response to the shutdown policy, the job vacancy in posting is also very low. That means the labor market conditions are bad. Workers cannot find jobs. At the same time, here, this chart is very interesting. If you compare the red dashed line with the blue dashed line or the solid line, this positive measure measures the share of the unemployment with zero search. Search of unemployed worker with zero search. Basically, this says only when UI policy is included, we see a positive, like around 15 to 20% of unemployed workers in the model who do not search, okay, in the contact sector. This measure is still positive, 10% for non-contact sector when there's UI benefits, okay? If we look at those workers who do not qualify for UI benefits, the same case compared to this panel, we see zero share of the unemployed with no search effort. Okay, so this comparison says the main difference why people do not want to search in this period is actually caused by the more general benefit in terms of the search effort. Because the difference between here and here is these people qualify for benefit, these people do not qualify for benefit. Okay, so this is another counterfactor to say, yes, higher benefit contribute to some of the increase in the unemployment rate. And as I explained, that's very intuitive because 70% of people can receive benefit more than their wages, right? So that actually generate some disincentive effect. Finally, so if we decompose the impact of UI on unemployment into the three different programs. So these are the three different changes. The overall overall increase unemployment rate by 3.8%. This is basically the number here, 3.8, right? So this 3.8 is the aggregate impact, taking into account the amplification from the mitigation policy and health dynamics. So if we further decompose this into the contribution from the three programs, the result is here. So what this says these two contribute the most. That was I said, 90% come from these two programs in terms of the UI effect on unemployment rate. However, it also says a lot of people say $600 top up may be the key thing which drives up the unemployment rate. Here we actually say the eligibility expansion also contributes significantly, right? 1.5 percentage points, right? This is 2%. So our decomposition provides a kind of a clear view for policymakers to maybe in the future to better understand or better design the policy. At least it has a reference, which program how much each program contribute to the increase in unemployment rate. But this pattern is the same. We can see the same pattern in the reduction in cumulative deaths, right? So see, these two programs, they increase the unemployment rate, but at the same time, they have contributed most of the reduction in accumulated deaths. They have reduced the deaths by 4.8%, each contributed 2.4%, right? So this is a key conclusion in our paper that the UI policy in the current pandemic, they increase the unemployment rate, but they also reduce the deaths, right? So there are two effects. In terms of the welfare, we compare the welfare across different groups. And there are two messages. One is if you look at the third row, this is a welfare change due to UI. You can see the positive. Positive means that welfare improvement. So UI policy basically improve the welfare of workers in both contact sector and the non-contact sector, but they reduce welfare for the non-workers, both for older and young, for the reason because these people do not benefit from the UI benefit, but they need to pay tax. The other thing I want to highlight is to look at here. The shutdown policy leads to a welfare decline in the contact sector. That's what I said, the shutdown policy destroy a lot of jobs. That's hit the contact sector most. So that's why this leads to a big reduction in welfare for the contact sector. Okay, but all the people prefer the shutdown policy because they reduce the baseline infection risk, not the infection risk at the workplace, but the baseline infection, like for the whole society. That benefits all the people. All right, so to conclude, so what we do is we have a paper, we set up a unified framework to quantitatively evaluate the UI policy change. And our main conclusion is that it increased the unemployment rate by 3.8 percentage points over the April to December period, but also reduced total infection and accumulated deaths by 4.9% And the change, this effect, 90% of that is driven by the eligibility expansion and the extra $600 increase in the level. But the third change, the 13-week benefit duration expansion, plays a much smaller role. So we are the first to have a model to decompose these two-dimension changes. And we show that the UI policy overall improves welfare of workers and reduces the welfare of non-workers, both young and old. So that's the basic conclude. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jun. So we are pretty much on time. So so actually, you know what? So our dean and our department chair and the graduate director, they are here. So I believe they have they should have a valuable comment for you. So I do have some technical questions. So maybe I just wait for them to ask you some insightful comments, or at least they should they have some opinion.
Sure, thanks.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us, June. I am the dean of the college, but I've also had some training in econ, so I was particularly interested in your talk today. So thank you. I do wonder, we know that by looking across the country, states had different implementation levels for shutdown laws, and for the if I understand the news correctly, the Nebraska governor did not implement the extra $600 as part of the unemployment, the CARES Act unemployment compensation. So are there differences if we look regionally, or that you can see that could show leaders what does and doesn't work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. First, I was not aware of Nebraska didn't implement this $600 benefit top up. So I think my thoughts about this great question is our model is a macro model, which try to evaluate at the national level of this macro policy. And based on the average level, so our model suggests this UI policy change is important. It's important in two dimensions. Of course, it contributes to some of the increase in the unemployment rate, but at the same time, it greatly helps reduce the total deaths in the economy, and based on our calculation, the welfare overall is improved. So if we think this is the average based on the whole country, it could kind of shed light on maybe the performance for each state. However, region by region, you're right, there could be huge differences for two reasons. One is that different region, the labor market conditions could be different, and the industry structure could be different. So there's this type of heterogeneity is not in our model. So I think our research probably provides more like a reference at the average level, at the national level. But I think your question is very important in the sense I think this difference could trigger important research by comparing the difference across different states using some other approach, probably not the structural model, but maybe the reduced form analysis try to compare the similar state with different policies. Thank you.
Thank you.
Since Shigang mentioned me, thank you very much, June, for giving us a wonderful presentation this afternoon. My comment is maybe very similar to what Dusty has said in the chat box, that I do not necessarily think the UI policy somehow destroyed jobs or contributed to the loss of jobs. I think they're more a reaction to this very emergency situation that we are in. And I think the way to think about this incentive to work is really to ask the question that some of the job losses are in fact temporary. You know, they're probably more like furlough rather than company letting you go permanently. So to the extent you can identify and differentiate the types of unemployment in that way, I think is crucial for evaluating the effect of unemployment insurance in a very special situation, right? So for me, it's a disincentive if the employer call you back and you go, I'm not interested in working anymore, right? So that will be where the incentive would be. You're temporarily laid off because everything is shut down. Now that we are kind of open, if employer calls you back to work and you go, I don't want to come to work anymore because I'm receiving all this wonderful benefit. So I think that's going to be a very important distinction between real destruction of jobs or just merely a temporary destruction of jobs because of our very special situation. So that's just my general feel about the presentation, but I thought it was very elegantly done.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think these are very good comments, in particular on this temporary layoff. So I think there were a lot of discussions on this, and I fully agree with you. It's very hard to distinguish, among all the unemployed, who are truly like a temporary laid off, who are more permanent laid off. So this is one thing which our model cannot capture. So our model just capture the aggregate dynamics based on the aggregate employment rate. But I think yes, more research should be done in providing more evidence on how much. I know there's some survey, but I don't know how credible that it is to provide more evidence on how much is temporary, how much is permanent. I think that's a key thing, right? Even right now, the unemployment rate is still around like 8 or 9%. People may think, oh, 8 or 9% is already halfway down from the peak. But if we compare with the 2007-2009 recession, at that time, the US unemployment rate peaked around 10%. And then we were saying, wow, it's so high. So 8 or 9% is still pretty high. So I think the key question is, suppose there are a big amount of unemployment is more permanent, then we probably would more likely to see a more gradual recovery in the labor market, more gradual decline in the unemployment rate. And regarding the identification strategy, I think that's a great question. There are different ways to approach that. What you suggest is definitely a very convincing way. If we can ask each person, say, hey, whether you have the opportunity to go back and whether you want to go back, that's perfect. But our approach is like a traditional macro approach based on this counterfactual. Say, suppose our model captures the aggregate economy. Suppose we take out this policy change. What would be the change in the unemployment rate? I see the difference.
Let me say one last thing. So I think given the current environment we are in, where, like discussions about policies are very crucial, a lot of people have very unclear understanding of what's going on. So my suggestion is just to be a little bit more careful, not to blame the current unemployment rate, 90% of which are due to the unemployment insurance. I guess is what I would suggest for the next round of presentation to the public. Sure.
That's very important. Maybe you reminded me, maybe there's something I didn't say clearly. Those 19% is among the, I mentioned 90%, but that 90% is among the 3.8 percentage points attributed to the UI policy. But there are more than 10 percentage points related to the shutdown policy. So my point is actually the shutdown policy accounted for majority of the increase, not the unemployment insurance. So in that sense, I think the UI policy is very important. As a welfare calculation suggests, it overall improves the welfare. Yeah, but thanks for reminding me that. That's actually a very helpful comment. I know it's a very sensitive topic. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Cassie. By the way, I want to elaborate a little bit. So actually, this is kind of like a gap between our micro and macro. Sometimes, so this is more like an empirical question, right? So that's typically missing in the macro research. Yeah.
That's true.
So any further question? Dusty, so do you want more to say about a point?
No, I think Kathy did a good job of explaining it. So I think that was great.
All right. Ben, thanks for coming.
So thanks a lot for all the comments, and I really enjoyed the talk, and hope everyone have a good Friday.
Yeah, so this is like a kickoff. So there's like a technical issue. So I forgot to record the first part. So I need to figure out how to make that part off. Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.